One, and we are recording with Dr. Barry Levine, author of The Spider. At the extent, you're not. Oh well,
I'm not.
well, all right. Well, I thought you were. I guess that's a compliment then. Barry Levine, Mr. Barry Levine, author of The Spider, about the extensive criminal network of Jeffrey Epstein, available on Audible. A fantastic listen that I will put in the description. Bone chilling. And before I keep running my mouth, how about you please introduce yourself, sir?
Sure. First of all, I appreciate you having me on. I've reviewed some of your past interviews. I find them very intriguing. I've had a long career in both television and print. I was Pulitzer Prize nominee for investigative reporting. I was winner of Huffington Post Game Changer Award for shoe leather reporting over my course of my 40-year career. In the past few years, I've turned my attention away from print and television, which incorporated magazines, newspapers, television news shows, to now working on books, which I enjoy. It gives me the opportunity to go in depth on subjects that appeal to me. The first book I wrote 2 years ago was called All the President's Women, Donald Trump in the Making of a Predator. That was for Hachette. That book, me and my team, we revealed about 43 new instances of inappropriate behavior on Trump's part with women. There's a lot of sordid details in that book. What was interesting was when I was working on the Trump book, of course, Jeffrey Epstein kept on coming up because the two were friends in New York and Florida. They were neighbors, in fact, in Palm Beach. And there was some crossover in terms of their partying together and so forth. So I was actually finishing up the Trump book right on deadline when, in fact, Epstein was found dead here in New York in his jail cell, and it just seemed to me the next, the next book, because I had already developed a lot of sources related to Trump and Epstein in my work that I did on All the President's Women. So it was a natural leap to the second book. And that is called The Spider, Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. That book was done for Crown Random House and was published last October.
And it's I guess to I interviewed Charlie Duke, who walked on the moon. And then I had to really kind of focus myself. I was like, I can't ask him the same questions he's been asked for the last 50 years. And I tried to do that. I'm not sure how well I did that. And I say that to say for the listener, although I normally don't do kind of, structured podcasts. I'm more of a kind of fire from the hip and see what happens. This is something where, so as not to fall into Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself memes and not uncovering anything new, which, although funny, sure, there's no weight to that. And so for everyone listening, we did set up, or Mr. Barry Levine asked me to answer or ask some questions. So I structured what I thought were the most pertinent and perhaps intriguing questions, again, as opposed to just, although that was one of the 7 questions, did Jeffrey Epstein kill himself, to kind of go deeper into that. So everyone listening, if you see me and Mr. Levine looking off screen, we're going back to the questions, but I thought it was a good idea. And obviously it was Mr. Levine's idea. So with that, we will start. So question number 1, does Epstein's wealth represent that of someone worth $557 million? to a broke 31-year-old like myself, wealth is wealth. Planes, penthouses, Rolls Royce, etc. But to someone with a keener eye, did he have access to more money, perhaps billions of dollars?
And I think that's an excellent place to start, because it really was his wealth and connections that opened up this lifestyle for him. What's interesting is, I spent a lot of time calculating the actual cost to his pocketbook in terms of how much money he had to put out for flying these victims to him, moving them around, pocket change to him in terms of giving these girls $200 or $300 at a time for the quote unquote massages. Even with the monies that he paid out in terms of some outside of court settlements to about a dozen women, we're only talking about Epstein investing upwards of maybe $35 to $40 million. That was the conservative number I came up with on his abuse of women, which for him, and the depths and the depravity of countless lives that he ruined, you can't put it anyway into money figures. But what I'm trying to say here is Epstein was able to carry out his depravity over the course of many years, involving hundreds of women. And it's sickening to think that for him, it only cost him, in terms of financially, roughly $40 million, which for him was really kind of a drop in the bucket to some degree. The truth of the matter is that Epstein, it's important to I think talk about his real wealth. I don't think Epstein had access to billions of dollars. His wealth, and again, following his death, the Southern District in New York, along with Denise George, who is the Attorney General in the Virgin Islands, where Epstein had his homes, and she basically froze all of his assets after his death in an effort to untangle the web of finances. The truth of the matter is that Epstein, probably at his height of wealth, had maybe $634 million. Figures have been placed about $100 million less. He was not a billionaire. He knew billionaires, and he was friends with billionaires, like Leslie Wexner, who was his main client for many years. And of course, he knew individuals like Bill Gates and Leon Black. But Epstein did not have that type of money. Epstein was able to build his wealth, and I think it's important to kind of understand how he made his money before we go, really talk beyond that. Epstein made his money early on. The first real money he made was in the 1980s, when he was working for arms dealers like Adnan Khashoggi and Sir Douglas Leese. This was Epstein's first taste of kind of jet setting. This was a kid from Coney Island, Brooklyn, New York, who, I mean, I visited his boyhood home. I looked out the window of his boyhood home, and he couldn't even see a few blocks away. He couldn't even see the amusement rides on the Coney Island boardwalk. He grew up in a very tiny, very modest 2-bedroom house with his parents and his brother. Their exposed water pipes. This was a kid who early on dreamed of having money. What most of the high school kids remember about him was that he was always telling people he was going to be rich, and that he was going to, have a lot of money one day. And he was a bit of a nerd, but he had an incredible mathematical sense, and was able to almost use his head like a computer. And so banking really beckoned him, even though he was a college dropout. And after spending a little time at Bear Stearns on Wall Street, Epstein found a hold in terms of being the middleman on arms dealing. And he would, there's nothing that rich people like more than protecting their money and also making more money from it. And Epstein was very good at helping individuals with tax shelters and so forth. I'm a journalist. I'm not a financial expert, but I can tell you that Epstein understood the options trading on Wall Street, and that was his specialty. And he really understood more than anybody else at that time the ability to take an individual's money and place that money in tax shelters and help them make a lot more money. Now, when he hooked up with these arms dealers in the 80s, this was money. Epstein was a go-between in terms of bringing parties together. And so he ended up skimming off a lot of money from these guys. And this was really his first taste at flying off in helicopters and landing on yachts overseas, and having meeting these individuals kind of in a cloak and dagger type of way. Epstein always fancied himself this nerdy kid from Brooklyn, New York, who talked with this thick, Brooklyn accent. He always fancied himself as something of a spy. And in fact, he used to tell girls very early on, right out of high school, that he was a spy. And of course, there was nothing to back that up. It was just bragging. But he was taken with that type of lifestyle. And so the arms trade, the arms dealing trade back at that time gave him this sense that he was this James Bond type of character. Now, did he actually become a spy later in life? That's something, that we can certainly discuss, because there's a lot of great rumors and innuendo related to that. And there are some specific facts that we can get to. But I think it's important to understand his assets. And as I said, he made his first real money from arms dealing. And then he really went into business on his own, believing that he would only take on billionaires as clients, in terms of offering a very boutique financial service, as I said, to help individuals make more money through tax shelters and so forth. And of course, as the public knows, the big fish that Epstein snagged through an introduction was Les Wexner, who was a billionaire from Ohio, who at that time had created the Limited Company, and of course Victoria's Secret, and some of the offshoots in that company. And Les was actually a billionaire with upwards of maybe $5 billion in assets. And that relationship, that professional relationship and that personal relationship, of course, has been under scrutiny by journalists and others for a very long time, in the belief of why it took Leslie Wexner so long to disassociate himself from Jeffrey Epstein. And that really didn't occur until Epstein really was coming under scrutiny by the feds. But what is highly significant is that Epstein legitimately made, I would say, the bulk of his wealth during that professional relationship. He was, of course, Leslie Wexner's personal money manager. He had power of attorney for Les Wexner. But what Epstein did that allowed him to make, I would say, hundreds of millions of dollars was from his association with Leslie Wexner, and to do it legitimately inside the law, was that Epstein had created about a dozen trusts. And these were trusts that were titled science interests, health interests, art interests, community interests. And records show that between 1991 and 2006, Epstein oversaw the sale through the New York Stock Exchange of more than $1.3 billion of limited company stock that was held by these trusts. And that represented a vast pool of cash that was controlled by Epstein. And Epstein would liquidate, this is inside the law, Epstein would liquidate large amounts of stock, and he would then make large purchases for himself, homes, planes, islands, and so forth. A majority of the money, of course, went to charity, but Epstein had figured this formula to make himself incredibly rich. And that really, and then once he had that money, Epstein, through his offshore accounting, tax shelters, was able to even grow that money even more. So that was truly the pool of money that that Epstein really built his wealth on. There's accusations and rumors about embezzlement and skimming money and bribery. I'm not saying that through my investigation into Epstein, I'm not saying that these allegations of bribery and embezzlement are not true, but I think that if any additional money was brought into Jeffrey Epstein's coffers through this way, it was rather minimal compared to the actual wealth that he had done legitimately. Now, there's great questions over the company that Epstein had at the end of his life, which was based in the Virgin Islands. And in fact, I went to the Virgin Islands to investigate his company called Southern Trust. And this is a company that is still under scrutiny by the Southern District of New York as they continue their investigation, and also by the Virgin Islands Attorney General, Denise George, because they believe, and I believe also, that that company was a front for Jeffrey Epstein's criminal conduct and criminal enterprise. The company itself was labeled as a company for DNA testing, for cancer research, and so forth. But you know, I've learned that it really was a front for his criminal enterprise, which was sex trafficking and bringing children from different countries to the Virgin Islands, at least at the end of his life, where he, raped them and had, sexually tortured them and so forth. It was I believe the computers at Southern Trust that concealed very elaborate sex trafficking operation. And it was, you couldn't gingerly, arrange to bring girls into another country without having a really elaborate setup in terms of how you were able to do this. And so Epstein, as I said, was a mathematical genius. And, despite the fact that he did make money for people legitimately, he was also diabolical in the sense that he created systems to move, young kids around the country for him. And, of course, the $1 million question is for other rich and powerful men. And of course, the public knows the headlines involving Prince Andrew for the most part, and the fact that Epstein allegedly had groomed a woman by the name of Virginia Roberts, and then basically lent her out to Prince Andrew and others for sexual favors that Epstein would basically use to gain leverage and weight on, rich and powerful individuals. Now, it's important to also understand that if anything good has come out of Jeffrey Epstein's death, it is the fact that Denise George had frozen the assets of Epstein's wealth in the Virgin Islands, and with the cooperation of the co-executors of Epstein's estate, was able to establish a compensation fund for Epstein's victims. And I can tell you that that compensation fund has already given out $121 million to 135 people thus far. These are victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. And to understand the weight of what Jeffrey Epstein did with these young women, when you make a comparison that Harvey Weinstein victims have collected or have received collectively about $17 million, Epstein's victims have received more than $120 million. Now, these rewards have ranged from a few $100,000 to several $1 million, depending on how the compensation fund directors viewed the abuse of some of these women. Some were repeatedly raped by Epstein over the course of weeks or months or even years, while others may have had a very limited exposure to him. So Epstein's wealth, the estate right now, of course, has dropped based on the compensation fund. And by the last estimate, there's about $240 million left of Epstein's wealth. And the estate, under the direction of the government and the Virgin Islands, has been selling off Epstein's assets. And there's a question on where that money will end up. Will it end up with Jeffrey Epstein's brother, his only sibling, Mark Epstein, or will it end up in the hands of the government, whether that be the United States or the the U.S. Virgin Islands. That still remains to be seen. But we do know, as I said, that at least out of his death, some good has come in the sense that his victims have been compensated. Not that you can ever compensate in a financial way
Sure.
for destroying lives, ruining childhoods. As I report in my book, it is so sad as to what has happened to his victims. Some have ended up in drug use, others in sex work. He destroyed countless lives through his enterprise. But I hope you have a little sense here in how he made his money, and what's become of it thus far.
That was a brilliant answer, and that is why you were an author, because you can give well fleshed out answers. Thank you. That was perfect. Yeah. So I was just thinking, the pertinence of that question to me was, it'd be like if a bunch of middle schoolers playing basketball, or kindergartners, and then I come along 30, and I haven't played basketball in 15 years, but I still know some. To them, I would seem like Michael Jordan. I'd be twice their height, right? I'd have a better form. I could get rebounds, and they might go, "Oh, that guy's a pro." But to someone with a keener eye, they'd say, "No, he's a lot better than you, but he's not a pro." And that, I guess, is where my question came from. Is I see him, I go, penthouses, New York, Virgin Islands, fleet of planes. He's rich, and it's like, to someone with a keener eye, they might say that's not. But as you just explained, and as you explained in the book, he did have a legitimate. He had a nest egg, and there is sort of an importance of, well, when you're rubbing shoulders with all these people, and like you said, you do have to have an elaborate operation, right? If you're selling cocaine on the corner in the slums, you only have to have so much of an operation. If you're an international drug cartel, you start to get a little more fine honed. And as insidious and nefarious as it is, respect the system for what it is, I guess, right? It's a complex system, right?
Yeah.
So that is, I guess, that leads into question 2. Does it? Yes. And so I guess I'll set it up with, and this is again all of my own assertions, if he's rubbing shoulders with these people and he has this elaborate, sex trafficking operation, which I do believe arose genuinely as his own thing. It wasn't someone plucked him and said, "Hey, you're Agent Epstein and this is what you're doing," but more so like a target of opportunity. Here's a guy, got the money, rubbing shoulders, has this devious addiction, and just pulling it off well. Ooh, man, you could really compromise some people if you just got him and just tweaked it a little bit, right? And so question 2, for everyone listening, is that, referring to question 1, is the answer to the previous question probable cause for the assertion that he was an intelligent asset used for nation state and or corporate blackmail? So, Mr. Levine?
Yeah, I think that there's no black and white answer here for any of these questions, because there's a lot of gray.
Yeah.
In every response, there was a lot of gray with some of the girls, for instance, that I wrote in the book about, were they victims or were they, co-conspirators in some way? Because he took advantage of these girls. Not only did he give them money, but he asked them to bring their friends as part of the sex trafficking operation. So they, in fact, were given money for turning others on to him. And yes, of course, they were victims. And I justify that in the sense that Epstein took advantage of young women who would not have made, their thinking would not have been the same if they were adults. But when you're a 14 or 15-year-old girl and you're told, send your friends over and you'll get $100 for every friend you send over, at that stage of their life and their mind, not fully being able to comprehend right from wrong and looking at it as an adult, they might have done things that they later certainly regret. So there's gray in that sense, in terms of, whether someone was a victim or whether someone was a co-conspirator with him to some degree. And there's a lot of gray in whether Epstein had the ability to use his power for being an intelligent asset for nation state or corporate blackmail. I think that a lot of journalists, I've listened to a lot of podcasts, a lot of experts, I think give Jeffrey Epstein a lot more credit than he deserves.
Okay.
As I said, this was a guy who fancied himself as a spy, loved kind of having that aura around him. But was he really, truly an intelligent asset? I haven't seen enough evidence that I would absolutely say that is possible. I mean, we do know that Epstein, I will say this, there is certainly a case to be made that Epstein was connected to Israeli intelligence in terms of the Mossad. You have to understand that, excuse me,
fine,
that Epstein targeted, in terms of building his contact and his network. And I'm not saying that certainly any of these men were that Epstein passed on women to any of these men. That's not the particular case I'm stating here, but Epstein targeted, through New York and his connections in New York and Florida through the banking community, Epstein was able to target a lot of wealthy Jewish men, okay? And I actually think, and I've discussed this in the past in interviews, in the sense that it was, for instance, like a Leslie Wexner, okay? Epstein was this Brooklyn kid who had in kind of maybe, Les Wexner was used to dealing with Midwestern Jews where he lived in Ohio and so forth. Epstein had this Brooklyn sway to him, this chutzpah that he had to him, where he was able to kind of talk the talk and walk the walk. And I think a lot of very smart, wealthy Jewish men put their guards down because Epstein was Jewish. He was from Brooklyn. He knew a lot of people, and they gave him the time of day. They allowed him to enter their circles. He gave them financial advice. He would help bring different people together in terms of contributing to, one person contributing to somebody else's charity. He was doing a lot of middle of the ground work in the sense of bringing people together. He really excelled at that. That was a strength he had. He was a talker, and he was able to bring wealthy people together. And listen, this was a reason that Bill Gates was interested in him near the end of Jeffrey Epstein's life, because he believed that Epstein could bring together individuals who could help his philanthropic causes at the Gates Foundation. Of course, Bill Gates, like so many others, would end up completely disassociating themselves with Jeffrey Epstein. But Epstein was able to, I think, really make connections with wealthy Jews because of who he was, and so he was able to. When you talk about intelligence comes in other forms beyond what you might consider putting someone in what's called a honeypot, which is exposing them to a woman, having surveillance footage. So you have a sex tape. So you have something for blackmail purposes. Epstein, I think, gained intelligence from individuals, but I also think that it wasn't necessarily always through sexual means. Now, were there in fact, wealthy, rich, and powerful men that Epstein may have turned on some of these girls to, Virginia Roberts to, and so forth? The answer is absolutely yes. There's a great many allegations, and I think that we have not fully heard from the government's perspective who has been caught in that web. But I also think that Epstein bartered and brokered information that he was able to pick up through his connections with rich and powerful people. Epstein knew, two presidents. He knew Donald Trump. He knew Bill Clinton. He knew the royal family in the sense of Prince Andrew. He knew the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. He knew others, many others in the Israeli government. Epstein was, and of course he knew billionaires who hear secrets and who know secrets. And Epstein was a collector of secrets, and he was a collector of information, and he was a collector of favors. And he would brag to his girls that Bill Clinton owes him a favor, or this individual owes him a favor. But it always doesn't necessarily mean that these favors that he would gain on people actually came from honeypot type of behavior where he would turn men on to some of these young women. I believe that Epstein collected a lot of information, and I think he gained information because he dealt with so many rich and powerful individuals. Now, would that make him a candidate for intelligence? Absolutely. Is it possible that, for instance, the Saudis could have been interested in him? Absolutely. The Israelis? Absolutely. I think post his death, I think the Russians are interested in what information Epstein had on certain individuals. But was he actually an agent where he was being used in an intelligence gathering way? I would actually think not. I think that, as I said, the specter of him being a spy of some sort was something that played in Epstein's mind, and he was a braggart with a lot of these rich and powerful men, and I think he passed on a lot of secrets. But I don't think that that there was true blackmail and embezzlement connected to Epstein, because I really think that you have to understand that his life that he was living was consumed by this daily need of seeing these women, of sexual interactions with these women. This is something that consumed him. The rest of us were consumed with eating 3 meals a day, or working, or overseeing our children or whatever. Epstein was consumed with these sexual demons that basically took over his life, and he created, as I said, a vast network of sex trafficking operation to satiate himself, to satisfy himself. most of his time was spent satisfying himself. And as I point out in the book, it's not only shocking but appalling that Epstein would associate himself at these billionaire conferences or these scientific conferences, and on one given day he might be chatting up some of the biggest billionaires in the world at these conferences, and then the next day he's sexually torturing young girls. It is, almost inconceivable to think about how his life went from a day-to-day basis, where he was on the phone, meeting in person with rich and powerful individuals, and then, sometimes on the same day, doing these diabolical acts. So, was he a spy? I think there was a connection to intelligence. Yes, particularly the Israelis. What did he give them? What did he get out of that? I don't think anybody has proven thus far what that has led to.
It's almost I was just thinking when you said, his ability to go from on the phone or meeting these billionaires to sexual depravity, or depravity is putting it lightly, almost demonic nature. I mean, you think about the psychological damage he's doing.
Yeah.
He's kind of like a real American Psycho. I'm just thinking of like the movie. He kind of, his ability to show up at work in the morning and it's like the night before he chopped up a hooker, and it's like, it's kind of American Psycho, the real life American Psycho.
That to me, I think, was when you really focus your timeline and your researching, and you begin to see, where he was, who he was meeting with, the scientific conferences, and then you would line up these true dates and so forth when he was spending time with these individuals. And then you would take the testimonies and the police records and also the lawsuit documents and see how as you said, American Psycho, in the sense of meeting with former presidents or billionaires one morning, and in the afternoon, having a young girl tied up in one of his mansions. It boggles the mind in terms of his behavior, and I really think that those dark demons really drove him more than anything else. But at the same time, there was a constant need for getting favors from these individuals, because it was like a big shell game. He would line up his friends with and help them make money or get financial advice or contribute to to different charities. Epstein was kind of a middleman in a great deal of that.
It seems the second only to the sexual demons was almost a form of like validation, right? It was, he had to, I'm brushing shoulders with these people. I mean, again, very American Psycho, like, who has the better business card. He's friends with these people. And I mean, which begs the question, were these favors, was it honeypotting people for an intelligence agency, or was this just an organic, this is who he was? It was all about, was he procuring these women for guys to get videotapes on them, or was this just his way of, hey man, if you need this and you have this interest, I can do you what these other bankers can't. I can get you offshore tax havens. If you want a 15-year-old, I can do that. It, not to give him the benefit of the doubt, it's all evil, but it might have been very much so he's validating himself, right? It's like you talked about his obsession with Harvard, right? His when I grow up, I'm gonna be rich. It's this very it's this all which then kind of on the other side, this all kind of lends itself to, I mean, could there be a greater candidate for an intelligence agency, right? It's like a prepackaged, like it's like a turnkey home. Here's this guy with this network who's got this. I mean, before we even reach him, he has this network of guys that he's doing favors for and getting favors from, right? It would be like it'd be like if the CIA tapped Joe Rogan. Like he's already got this like audience. He's got this network of people. He can interview presidential candidates. He's already got this whole thing. He can control a narrative. It's a lot easier to get to one guy than it is to get to 500 guys. But I mean, it's kind of seeming more and more like the glass slipper. It's like he was just the perfect puppet, and the Mossad came along and he just slipped the hand right up in the puppet and said, you can do everything you're still doing. Hell, we'll maybe even, help you cut some corners. Get that guy, you get that guy, you get that guy. Just turn this, turn that, do a favor here, pass some legislation there. And it's very, and then if you go in and then research him like you did, most of us will look at it and go, no, that's just a sick guy. He was doing all this on his own. And it's like, yeah, it's the perfect cover. He was doing it all on his own. Right. It's, yeah, it starts to get mind boggling.
Well, I mean, there's no question that from an organic sense, Epstein wanted to have this control over his friends. Every phone call was taped. Everybody who entered his homes were caught on surveillance camera, not only in New York, but in the ranch in New Mexico, at at his island in the Virgin Islands, at the mansion in Palm Beach. Epstein set this up not under the direction of some intelligence agency from a country. Epstein set it up himself. In fact, in one of the sickest nuances to this story, Epstein actually, this was before the Palm Beach police did their first investigation of Epstein. Epstein actually had the help of the Palm Beach police in terms of setting up surveillance cameras in his mansion, because he had told police that he believed that some of his employees were stealing from him. And so they actually helped place surveillance cameras in Epstein's mansion in Palm Beach, which of course were later used for videotaping encounters with young women. But this was on Epstein's own part. This grew out of this obsession that he had, and but you're 100% right in the sense of, did this make Epstein an ideal candidate for intelligence gathering? Absolutely. I'm most shocked that Epstein didn't forge a greater relationship through an intelligence agency of the country, because I think had he done so, I think it's the opposite of the belief that, he knew so much that he was going to be that he had to be killed. I think it's the opposite, that I actually believe that if Epstein had a true intelligence connection, I think he would have been protected.
100%. 100%.
Left to first of all, he would have never been arrested. He would have been spirited to another country and so forth, and he would be living, somewhere where he would have access to young girls, and he would be protected in terms of turning over secrets and information. So I think while most people believe, he was killed because he knew too much, I think he ended up dead because he didn't have a truly secure intelligence connection. But I will say that to this day, we don't know, and we don't know truly what's on the videotapes. We don't truly know where they are. His associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, is coming up for trial here for grooming girls for Epstein here in federal court in New York in November. And of course, there's a belief that as her own insurance policy, she might be sitting on some explosive material. I did find, we did report in the book, and I think it's interesting noting, because I think there's a great fascination with the if sex tapes actually exist of not only Epstein performing these acts on these girls, but more importantly, some of these other rich and powerful men, if they in fact have been caught on these tapes, and if so, where are they? And I report in the book, let's just spend a couple of minutes on this gentleman. His name is John Mark Dugan. I don't know if you're aware of who John Mark Dugan is. I devote a chapter to him at the end of my book. And John was he worked in the Palm Beach, Florida County Sheriff's Office.
In
the early 2000s. He's a former Marine. And he claims that the lead detective in the Palm Beach investigation of Jeffrey Epstein, Detective Joseph Recarey, who did all the heavy lifting and really was sickened by the way that investigation went in terms of Epstein getting the slap on the wrist by Florida prosecutors and doing a limited period of time on a prostitution rap. Dugan claims that Recarey turned over to him this file box of tapes, and that the file box contained 700 CDs that were each of them labeled with a day and a particular room in the Palm Beach mansion that had video footage on it of these encounters. And Dugan claims that Recarey asked him to upload all the CDs onto a hard drive, and so Dugan apparently did that. And what's interesting is Dugan was raided by the FBI in March of 2016, and he had previously made copies of these CDs. So we believe that the FBI actually is sitting on evidence that was recorded in Epstein's house in Palm Beach. Now, why they haven't made indictments off of that evidence in terms of rich and powerful individuals, that remains to be seen to this day. Although we're told that their investigation, is still continuing. Then the Dugan story took this kind of cloak and dagger aspect to it, where he fled to Russia, where he's living now. He said that we interviewed him for the book. He said that the MI6, the British intelligence, have been, interested in his material because they believe that he has Prince Andrew on his tapes. A journalist went over to Russia and apparently viewed a few minutes of some of the footage in which there's a man other than Epstein who is having sex with a young girl. And Dugan believes that these tapes, that he's basically signed off on a death ticket for himself, and he has sent another hard drive of the tapes to another individual in Russia, instructing him to release these tapes if he ever disappears or dies suspiciously. But I also find it interesting that Dugan fled to Russia in 2016, just as Trump was in the thick of his presidential campaign. And of course, there were questions at that time on whether Putin and the Russians had intelligence and videotapes of Donald Trump. And again, like so many other aspects of the story, there's different, coincidences here, but you have to wonder if Russian intelligence agencies, whether or not they've seen these tapes, whether they're, have anything on Trump or others. We just don't know. The more you report the Epstein story, the more rabbit holes you go down, and the more reporting you do leads to other aspects of reporting that really can take a lifetime to do. There's so many facets to this, to the story. It's mind-boggling, and I tried to piece together as best as I could for the book, The Spider, a comprehensive account not only of his life but also of his death, and these connections to the spy network and so forth. I think you also need to consider that his associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, that her father, Robert Maxwell, was without question, and this has been documented, had true intelligence spy gathering connections for the Israeli Mossad. Mm-hmm. And there's no question that it was that relationship that Epstein had developed with Robert Maxwell that led to basically Ghislaine Maxwell falling into Jeffrey Epstein's arms after her father was, in her belief, assassinated.
Thrown off a yacht, yeah.
Killed yacht, although the medical reports came back that he suffered a heart attack. Ghislaine believes that her father was killed by intelligence. There's a lot of connections here, a lot of connections that can't be overlooked. So any belief in the background of Jeffrey Epstein's life to intelligence, to a spy network, certainly makes a lot of sense. But I do think, as we discussed earlier, this was a guy who wasn't instructed by a country to set up or entrap individuals. Epstein did this on his own. Epstein clearly on his own. It was an organic outreach of his sex trafficking operation.
Yeah, it's kind of like that meme of like, you don't need to be a prepper, you just need to know a prepper, right? Prepper can, he can spend, all he can spend his life savings building a bunker, getting enough food for 30 years, water, generators. You just got to make sure you have a gun with one bullet. And, when society collapses, you shoot him and you take over. Why hasn't the FBI pursued this further? Well, I mean, if someone in the CIA, or if they passed it along to someone, they might be looking at it like, hey, well, now we have the keys to the kingdom. The intelligence is still good, right? It's still got a shelf life. All these billionaires and CEOs are alive. Yeah, and it again, he did it all organically. They might be looking at it as like there's no fingerprints on this. There's none of us. There's no payments from, CIA shell companies. They're like, this truly is foolproof, like, because we didn't do it. I mean, what better way to do it than to do that? Look at that candidate, and yeah, you don't even need to protect him. The fact that he got killed, you're right. The conclusion would be, I tend to agree with you. If he really was protected, he would have never been arrested. He would have vanished. He would have fled the country. It's right. He wouldn't have been whacked. And you would imagine, right, if he's got this desire for this validation and to, again, brush shoulders with these guys and to even tell girls he's a spy. I mean, would they even want him, right? Would they want the guy that's like, I want to be a spy? They'd be like, you want this too much, right? They want the guy that's like reluctant. They want to tap Bezos, who's like, I don't want any part of this. And they're like, well, here's some compromising information. All right, I'm in. they don't want someone like me that's like, hey guys, I have a podcast. Can I be in the CIA? They're like, this kid's going to blow the whole thing. And then we're going to have to kill him. And right. It might have been his, who knows? Maybe he truly thought he was just role playing. I mean, what better potential asset than a guy who liked to pretend he was a spy than to tap him again and then completely fingerprint free because it truly was organic. I mean, I don't know, man. It goes deep. You're right. The more questions you ask, the more rabbit holes come up. I can edit this out. I got to go use the restroom. Is that all right? And then we can keep going.
Sure. Yeah,
Beautiful.
take your time.
Awesome. Yeah. And if you got to go, you can go. Oh, excuse me.
I'm good. We'll pick it up on the...
All right. Perfect. Sorry, it's become a running joke on this podcast that I can only get to the 1 hour mark before I gotta use the bathroom, and that this podcast should be sponsored by like some sort of bladder medication or something. But I think I just like water. But all right, just making a note of the time, and we can continue. And I love this. I'm good to keep going. This is awesome. So we'll start recording. Yeah. I'll just cut out from here forward or before. So he's the perfect candidate for this. There's nothing they got to egg along. And again, why would you want to, if there is, like you said, MI6, getting involved, if there is video evidence of all of this, I mean, not only is it fingerprintless, but they're probably looking at this like, man, this is better like human intelligence than we've gotten since the inception of the CIA. They're like, this is perfect, right? And but to stick to the questions, so, well, I guess we've already kind of touched on this, but in reference to the previous question about, is this probable cause that he was with an intelligence agency? In reference to the previous question, what argument could be made that he wasn't intelligence? In the rarefied air of trillion-dollar nations, global shipping lanes, and thrones of power, where nuclear weapons and aircraft carriers are everyday variables on the chessboard, why wouldn't an intelligence agency use the path of least resistance, aka underage sex tapes? And the way I would maybe kind of change that question is there are so many things moving around. And I use this analogy all the time for like intelligence operations. If you're on a plane, you're on a 747, you're a terrorist, you have one bullet. How you can do the most damage? Shoot one person, okay. Shoot out the window, maybe depressurize the cabin. It's another way. No, you shoot the pilot and you can take the whole thing down. If you want to control one aspect, you always want something at the top where there are all these downward tentacles. In this, in a time when there are nuclear weapons, right? I think it was the Secretary of the Air Force said back in like the mid 2000s. I remember reading this in Popular Science, and he's talking about the future of fighter jets. And he's like, sure, we're going to get to the next generation where they're going to be extremely stealthy, and then we'll go on to hypersonics and then drones. But he goes, you have to remember that just because it's the Air Force, it doesn't mean we're going to stick to this love of planes. Like Curtis LeMay, Secretary of the Air Force under Kennedy, he loved the bombers. He led bombing squadrons into World War II, and then with the idea of supersonic bombers, nuclear bombers. But when he started to see just kind of how superior missiles were, he didn't need a pilot. You could shoot it from your own backyard. It could come down from orbit on target. And if it didn't hit, you could send 100 more. Even he had to start going, all right, I love these planes, but a missile gets the job done better. The Secretary of the Air Force in 2000 said, you have to understand at a certain point, if the best weapon to make every plane drop out of the sky is just a button we push, then that will be the Air Force. It's not always going to be, despite the name, about planes. So I'm going on that whole ramble because if the idea is to protect America, protect her assets, whatever that may or may not mean around the globe, is it always going to be James Bond? Is it always going to be a guy with black leather gloves and a sniper rifle, or the wire over the neck? It might change face to where we have videotapes from this guy who wanted to be a spy, and he has, he's got compromise on these billionaires. It might be the changing face of like, it's not like exploding pens and poison cigars for, to take out a Castro. Now it's videotapes from a toilet in a mansion in Manhattan. So the question again is, what argument could be made again, or that he wasn't intelligence, which we've kind of already covered, but just to go on with the questions.
Yeah. As I said, I truly believe that if Epstein truly was intelligence, he would not be dead today.
Yeah.
He would have been protected. I think that the basis of his life and his death, to me, shows that while he had connections with individuals who did have true intelligence connections, I think that there's people are putting too much weight on this related to Jeffrey. Jeffrey was, he was a very complicated individual in the sense that to some people he came across as as like an idiot. When Ghislaine Maxwell first introduced him as her boyfriend to some of her well-to-do British friends, they really looked down on him. They thought he had the intelligence level of some of the servants, from her family's estate in England. They didn't think that he was a really smart guy. Jeffrey walked and talked, with a kind of a thick Brooklyn accent. He never really dressed up. He was always comfortable wearing, sweats or jeans. It's hard to find photographs of him in a tie. I do have them in my book, but for the most part, he was really cut from a different cloth. He, as I said, he had a tremendous mathematical genius in terms of understanding numbers and being able to crunch numbers in his head and so forth to make people money and to set up tax shelters. But I don't think he truly had what one would need to be a true spy or a true intelligence gatherer. He was not. He still maintained a lot of very boyish tendencies that he had when he was a kid, growing up in Coney Island and so forth. But it will not stop the ongoing investigations. I also think you have to also seriously consider that if the U.S. government, if the Justice Department really believe that things are going to come back to haunt them related to Jeffrey Epstein, that if he was also providing intelligence to the U.S. government and so forth, I don't think that they would have ever charged Ghislaine Maxwell in terms of bringing her to trial, because this is going to open up the hornet's nest. It's getting to the roots of exactly what went on, who the rich and powerful were. She's alive and she can spill names. And I don't really think that if the government, the U.S. government, if they believe that they had something to hide related to Jeffrey Epstein, that she would never have been arrested. But it'll be interesting to see if she, rolls over and does a deal. I do think that the government does truly want to prosecute her because she did groom these young girls. She did, in a sophisticated manner, helped set up his network, ran all of the households, managed all the staff, was occupied on a day-by-day basis, making sure there are enough women to give him his quote unquote, sexual massages and so forth. She knows a lot. She knows Bill Clinton. She knows Donald Trump. She knows many wealthy and powerful individuals. And she, I think, is in a position to do a deal if she decides to go that route. So far, she is not, but we'll see. I mean, a deal could happen on the eve of the trial. So, it will be interesting to see what happens. But she knows, she knows where a lot of the bodies are buried. There's no question in my mind. And you have to also wonder, when she was arrested, Donald Trump said
I wish her well.
You also have to wonder if he wasn't quaking at the time in his boots as to what he might reveal or what she might reveal. And that, I think, also goes along with the Clintons. I think also have to wonder what she knows. I mean, she, again, was a personal friend of Bill Clinton. She went to Chelsea Clinton's wedding. That web of Trump, Clinton, Epstein goes deep, and there's a lot there. There's certainly a lot there. And when we get to question 5, I can give you some more specifics on Bill Clinton and Donald Trump.
Sure. And for future listeners, today is Monday, September 13th, 2021. At this moment, she is still alive. And now if she kills herself, then I don't know, that we'll have to do another podcast, but we'll save speculation for another time. On a side note, it is in the most, and I say this in the most loose, general, broad stroke way possible, because she's a demon too. It's almost kind of sad, because it seemed like she was just trying to impress him and win him over. It seems like all she really wanted was to just kind of like be his girlfriend. I mean, demons from hell, like, goes without saying, right? Man, it's almost kind of sad. Like, maybe they just would have been a couple. I mean, they tortured kids, they flew them in, they groomed them. I mean, right, inner circle of hell. The tiniest bit, you're like, man, I wonder if they could have just gone and been a couple. Probably not, but
well, she loved these girls and hated them at the same time.
Yeah.
She needed to, as I quote a friend of hers in saying, she told a friend, and this is quoted in the book, that she herself said, I can't sexually please him. And that is why I need to bring in these girls constantly for him. because he needs this. And it became a sickness in the sense that just like a heroin junkie needs to keep on going and will do anything to get the drugs, she literally was reduced to, as a socialite, grew up in a 100 and some odd room house in England. Her father was a huge media mogul and so forth. She was literally driving around New York and Florida, trying to pull young girls off the street out of parks and so forth. I mean, this is what she was reduced to. And then in the end, she became extremely sickened, with the presence of these girls. It was like feeding a heroin junkie. You had to keep on bringing the drugs into the house, but she dismissed these girls, saying, they're nothing to me. They're nothing to me. They became basically fuel for this monster to survive. And I think that's the only way she was able to justify what she was doing, was a total disregard for them as human beings, in terms of the way they tortured and groomed these individuals. And I've said in another interview, I really question, because I do believe that Epstein's sex trafficking enterprise would never have reached the depths and levels of depravity, and the complicated inner workings of the system of bringing kids forward. I don't think it would have ever happened if Maxwell had not been in his life. And I do. I will say this about her. She had been daddy's little girl. She was completely traumatized by her father's violent death. And Epstein was kind of waiting in the wings to take her in. He needed her contacts, and she needed his money, because he had left limited funds for his children. But at the time, his company was under, Maxwell had embezzled a great deal of money and so forth. And so she needed an outlet to maintain her lifestyle. So it was a perfect, match made in hell of these two individuals. He needed her Rolodex, and she needed someone to take care of her and to lay on, the homes and the travel and so forth. But as I've said in other interviews, there was a time that cross in the road came at that intersection in the road came at some point where she had to make that decision when she learned about his private sick lifestyle. She had to make a decision, want to go in one of two ways. Either she was going to run as far away as she could from Jeffrey Epstein and never look back, or decide that she was going to be a part of that. And she made that decision on her own at some point, that she was going to go down this road for him, and also not only act as a coordinator, but also herself became involved in the actual sexual abuses of these young girls. And it fed upon itself in this particular way. And to these young girls that they would pluck, the worst thing is that as a woman, she should have been a protector of these young girls, acting in a motherly fashion or as a big sister in some way. But instead, she basically fed these girls to the wolf. And I think a lot of these girls put this trust in her that she would protect them. And she did the exact opposite. She groomed them and took advantage of them. And I do think that if the trial goes to fruition in November, I do think the government will win. And I do think she'll be prosecuted, because I do think that they have the evidence. But we'll see. This is such a crazy story that anything certainly can happen. And but what won't happen, I believe, is that she's going to end up dead before trial. I mean, she's being watched like a hawk. It is they are, the Justice Department and the Southern District are taking every safety measure and security measure they can to keep this woman alive, to get her out.
Yeah, it's which again is why I said it's almost sad. It's almost in the loosest form possible. It's almost sad.
Yeah.
So we'll save question 4 for the end, and for everyone listening, it's not some special question. It's just, did Epstein kill himself? It is the meme that I swore I would try to avoid. So we'll skip to number 5. And did he have information? Well, again, we've kind of already answered this, but did he have information too valuable to let out on both Clinton and Trump? If a top secret U.S. stealth aircraft crashes behind enemy lines, on par with, if not more important than saving the pilot, is the use of thermite to destroy the weaponry. That is, our most valuable weapons are also those we are most apt to terminate in the case of them falling into wrongful hands. Is that the case with Epstein? And again, we see this with, right, Mike Durant, Black Hawk Down. We went in and obviously tried to find him, but we also went in and we got the bodies of all the pilots of interviewed Mr. Durant. But we got the pilots of the deceased, the bodies of the deceased pilots, right? The whole, no one left behind. They're going to have a proper burial. And then the second thing they did is make sure you throw a thermite grenade basically on the dashboard, destroy the computers, the avionics. I mean, I was having on an artilleryman yesterday talking about, like, yeah, no, his job was like, artillery tubes is one thing, whatever, we can bomb it. The computer with the locations of all the troops in that area of Afghanistan, it was my job was thermite. And if that didn't work, I shot it. And if that doesn't work, I'm supposed to punch it until it's broken. And that our very best weapons are also the ones that, ironically, were the ones where if we can't have it, no one can. We have to destroy it. Is that the case with Epstein? But as I believe you've pointed out pretty well argued in this podcast, is he would probably be protected. He would. It's not even that he'd be protected so much that he wouldn't be killed in jail. He never would have gone to jail. It would never even made it to the news, right? It would have been a very top down, hey, let this go. Don't invest. You would never even heard of it. It would just be a name that kind of floated up in the periphery and then went away. And I think the fact that didn't happen, I think you've actually argued the complete opposite of my point is, yeah, he would have been protected.
Yeah, I mean, before I get into Clinton and Trump, because I do have some specifics on them, I will say that I do think that the government, for the most part, probably didn't want to go anywhere near Epstein, the U.S. government. But the series in the Miami Herald on Alexander Acosta and what happened down in Florida and the slap on the wrist, it particularly coming up in the time of Me Too, that it forced the Justice Department, I think, to go back, and the FBI to go back to the information they had from the Florida investigation, and basically dust all that off, and based on public pressure, go after him. I think if that series in the Miami Herald had not perversion of justice had not happened, I think there's a real question as to how all this would have played out. But I think that their backs were up against the wall, and for the sake of the public attention on Epstein, that they had to arrest him. But I do think that if he was really being protected, I think Epstein would have been would have never flew his private jet back from Paris, where he was, back to New York, where they were just waiting for him. It just you don't let that happen to a true intelligence asset. You might kill him first,
Sure.
but you would never hands of another country would have never put it in the hands of the U.S. to arrest him. He would put out the master somewhere, or they would have killed him themselves.
Yeah.
Now, I do think it's worth taking a little time to go a little deeper on Trump and Clinton, and the whole question of whether Epstein, what he really had on them. And I think that there's a perfect quote that I have in my book that I wrote down here that I think is really important to reiterate. And that is Donald Trump's claims to have taken the initiative in breaking off friendship with Epstein was disputed to me by one of Epstein's closest confidants. And I report this in the book. According to this person's account, they were told by Epstein in 2016, and this is the quote, "If people knew," this is Epstein speaking, "if people knew what I know about Trump and Clinton, they'd cancel the election," end quote. This is, I can't reveal who this individual is, but I can assure you this is someone extremely, extremely close to him who agreed to speak to us without direct attribution on this person's identity. To me, that's a bombshell, that Epstein had the goods on both of these individuals. Epstein also told this person that, quote, he stopped hanging out with Trump for a specific reason. Wouldn't give the reason as to why, but before their falling out, Epstein claimed that to this person that Trump had visited him in his office about financial matters. Now, what does that mean? Was Trump trying to get financial help from Epstein in some way, through some of his other connections or whatever? We don't know, and I can't speculate. But I can only tell you what this individual said, to be quoted in the book. You certainly would have liked to have been a fly on the wall when Epstein and Donald Trump were together. The listeners, the viewers should know that their relationship, I think, goes back a lot farther than most people think. They were friends as far back as 1987. As I said, Epstein was a neighbor of Trump's near his Mar-a-Lago estate. His mansion was not far away, and the two of them partied together. I mean, this is, you probably have seen the video that NBC put out showing the two of them together. There's all kinds of, Donald Trump, of course, denies, as Bill Clinton, Les Wexner, Ehud Barak, Leon Black, the whole list of men that they took part in any wrongdoing in any way with Jeffrey Epstein. But Trump, you got to believe that Donald Trump knew what was going on. I report in the book, and I think this is very, very interesting, because Trump always said in public interviews he had no idea about these other, about Epstein and these young girls. But I absolutely believe that Trump had a pretty good idea what was going on. And I tell the story in the book of this golf journalist in 2000 who had been waiting with Donald Trump at an airfield in New York, and Trump was going to hitch a ride. Or actually, it was Epstein and Maxwell were going to hitch a ride on Trump's plane down to Florida. This is what these billionaires do, or millionaires do. They hitch rides on,
carpool,
flying Epstein's plane, or or they go on Trump's plane, or Clinton would fly on Epstein's plane, you know, the Lolita Express and so forth. Anyway, on this particular afternoon, this journalist was waiting with Trump, and he left out of the article that he did at the time, but he later came clean that he witnessed this very young girl boarding the plane with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and that the young girl was made up to look older than she was. And Donald Trump accompanied the two of them and this young girl on his plane down to Florida. You just put that out there. And again, this all eats away at Trump saying he had no real idea what was going on. Then you have a completely different story from the 90s of this particular victim of Jeffrey Epstein's, who said that when she was 14 years old, Epstein took her to Mar-a-Lago and introduced her to Trump. And Epstein specifically told Trump, and this was the quote, "This is a good one, right?" In the sense that, you know, look at this, you know, beautiful young, you know, 14-year-old girl. Epstein, for the record, in a 2010 deposition, said that he wouldn't answer questions on whether he actually had socialized with Donald Trump with women under the age of 18. There, of course, is the claim, which I reported and investigated to some degree, not only in the Trump book, but in the Epstein book, over this woman who is known as Katie Johnson, who claimed in 1994 she was a 13-year-old girl, and that she had been alleged that she was raped by both Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump at Jeffrey Epstein's mansion in New York. At the time of the election in 2016, parties on her behalf helped file a lawsuit alleging this against Donald Trump, but the lawsuit was withdrawn by her under death threats against her. To this day, no one really knows the extent of that story. And of course, Trump has claimed, as his people have said, that she was politically motivated, that she was put up by people, under political motivation to help take him down. So I think there's a lot of questions that if you would like to sit down, if Donald Trump ever was able to, not tell a lie and would ever come clean about what he says, in terms of really answering truthfully on what his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein really was. And you also have to think, is he sweating bullets behind the scenes on wondering about Ghislaine Maxwell's prosecution, whether she will ever invoke his name during the trial? Because it could open up a hornet's nest. And it's the same thing with Bill Clinton. Just like that long-standing relationship between Trump and Epstein, the Clintons go back with Jeffrey Epstein a long way. Jeffrey and Ghislaine visited the White House in '93 when Epstein had put money as a donor into White House renovations at the time. They were invited to this elaborate dinner to thank the donors. Epstein was thanked by Clinton at the time. Epstein contributed to Clinton's global initiative in 2005. As the world knows, Clinton flew a great deal on Epstein's jet during fundraising activities for Clinton's global initiative efforts. They went all over the world together. Virginia Roberts, who is the victim who has made the allegations of Prince Andrew, has said specifically that Jeffrey Epstein told her, and this is the quote, "Clinton owes me favors." And like Bill Clinton, like Donald Trump, who saw Epstein in the presence of young girls. There's one particular dinner that I noted in the book where Virginia was 17 years old at the time. She was with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. They were in the DR, they were in the Dominican Republic. And all of a sudden, the Secret Service walk into the dinner, and who is with them but Bill Clinton? And Bill Clinton sits down at this dinner table, sits down next to Ghislaine Maxwell. And it's Epstein, Maxwell, Bill, Virginia Roberts, and two other girls that Virginia said were no older than 17 years old. So, I really find it as a journalist. I find it, when you look at all this information, this research, for Bill Clinton and Donald Trump both to say they had no real sense of Jeffrey Epstein's secret lifestyle, I find, ridiculous, because both of them were in the presence of Epstein with underage girls.
I mean, is there anyone in power that isn't a pedophile? I mean, what is the conclusion of all? Like, you see all this, and then you're just like, it kind of feels hopeless. You're like, what, is anyone even allowed to get to the heights of power without being compromised with this stuff? Because then they have an on and off switch. We'll get to the next question. It's for everyone listening, get the book.
As a side, I also think that Bill and Hillary are also probably quaking a little bit on
absolutely
up Clinton. She was closer to the Clintons than she was Trump, although she was very close to Trump. She was extremely friendly with Chelsea Clinton. She attended Chelsea's wedding. I don't know. We'll see. When you've been behind bars in Brooklyn in this hellhole federal lockup that Maxwell has been in, where you have someone waking her up every 15 minutes to make sure that she's not trying to do anything to herself, after months and months and months, that mindset that she might have initially thought she was going to protect people, that might be out the window now, because no one knows what her mind like now after months of incarceration.
Yeah, that's got to break you. That's got to break you mentally, right? I mean, I'm never going to give an inch. All right. It's just the march of time. And I didn't know that. Waking up every 15 minutes, I would snap in 2 days. I would start making confessions that weren't even true. I'd be like, Mr. Levine he's selling heroin. Just let me go. They'd be like, we didn't even ask you. What are you talking about? Like, that's just me. One night of not enough sleep, I'm cranky. Like, you go in, I'm not going to give an inch. A couple months later, it's, maybe you want to go home, huh? Maybe you don't want to do this anymore.
Well, she's facing 30 years plus. And, if she gives up something and does a deal and does 10 years as opposed to 30 plus, that is a life changer. That's a game changer for her, because it means that she will still have some years of her life where she could do something productive on her own part in terms of just being alive.
Do whatever you want.
She goes to full 30, forget it. Her life is over at her age. So, that is got to be weighing on her mind if she's going to give something up and try to do a deal. I mean, after Epstein, there's no question that they do that they have to give her jail time, because to not do so would be a public outrage. So she is going to face real time. It's just a question of how much time that'll be, and whether she's going to cop to something and give up some names and have something of her life left at the end.
With So to go from there, kind of segueing into question 6, was Epstein one agent in a larger network? And I had to look it up when I wrote this question. Ohrdruf, OHRDRUF, was the first concentration camp that was liberated. I didn't know that, but I looked it up for this question, and I said, was this like the discovery of Ohrdruf? Horrific, but only the first concentration camp liberated amongst a vast network where you just, the first is terrible, and then you start to find more, and they're linked by trains, and they have number systems, and you go, reality starts to fracture. One of these is bad enough. A whole network, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Chelmno, Dachau, you go, oh, really, it's like it's like the screen glitching. You're just like, this isn't true. How did this happen? Oh, they have oh my God. And yeah, 6 million, 12 million. So that's what I asked. Was Epstein's bad? Ghislaine's bad? I mean, did we just brush over like the tip of like a T-Rex fossil? And it's like, oh man, you don't know you don't know a tenth of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, just by phrasing the question as you did, you should know, or the listeners should know. And I know you used it just to kind of flag this to focus on was this part of a vast network conspiracy and so forth. But the reality was, just in terms of Epstein and concentration camps, when you just raised that, a lot of his relatives did perish in the Holocaust. And as I said, Epstein, if he had any true intelligence connections, it was certainly closest to the Israelis. I mean, Epstein had access to Israel's leaders through major Jewish organizations, affiliations, the UJA, Federation, Hillel, National Council of Jewish Women, Friends of Israeli Defense Forces. Epstein was a supporter of the mega group. This was a group of America's most significant Jewish businessmen: Spielberg, Charles Brofman, Ronald Lauder, Les Wexner was a founding member. As I said earlier, Epstein had a relationship, a friendship with Ehud Barak, who had visited Epstein in New York. Barak had been introduced to Epstein by former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres. If there's any intelligence gathering, there's no question that there was Israeli involvement. But in terms of the sex trafficking network itself, that goes deep. That's like the discovery of one concentration camp and a vast network that was kind of hidden behind the scenes. I mean, there are many individuals that Epstein did not do this alone. I mean, there's individuals overseas who supplied young women to him. A gentleman who was apprehended by the French government. The modeling was a top modeling executive over there who has been arrested over there, separate from the Epstein allegations. There are individuals all over the world that have taken part in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operation in terms of either providing girls, brokers of young girls, modeling agencies who have provided young girls to him. There's the transportation aspect of getting the girls to him. And there's no question that, what amazes me is that, and maybe the Justice Department does have this, or the Southern District has this in some hidden room somewhere in their headquarters, that there's not some, mafia style chart with Jeffrey at the top and Maxwell underneath that, and then tentacles that go down in all the directions of the there were 4 women who were named as co-conspirators, possible co-conspirators, Palm Beach case. And then on the sides, you have the international connections, modeling agents and other individuals that helped Epstein, either in exchange for money or exchange for favors in terms of supplying him with women. There's no question that after Jeffrey Epstein's arrest in Florida, where he got the slap on the wrist prosecution for the prostitution conviction, and it was named as a sexual predator, put on the sexual predator list in Florida, that Epstein's operation expanded from just getting girls domestically in New York and Florida and elsewhere. That the expansion was outside of this country, and focused more on bringing young girls to his house in the Virgin Islands, on the island, because it was, first of all, it was off of U.S. soil to some degree, and it was there was a big concentration of girls coming in from Europe and elsewhere that were being, flown into him to satisfy his perversion. So, when you are bringing women in from foreign countries, you need countries who are going to give these girls passports, who are going to arrangements to fly these girls, and whether or not families were being paid off in these countries to get these girls over there. This is a vast network that still needs untangling, and why we're not seeing a larger international investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, to me, boggles the mind. And a lot of these countries, particularly in France, separate from the arrest of this modeling executive, the French authorities have really did very little looking into the aspect of what Jeffrey Epstein was doing at his mansion in Paris with young women, and even more so than the French, basically turning a cold shoulder. You have England, that for the most part has tried to look the other way and is just mortified of the attention that Prince Andrew is continuing to come under, and have not done more so there in terms of investigating him and putting the screws to him. It is, no one wants to go anywhere near this because they know how murky it is to wade in this particular pool. When you begin wading into the Jeffrey Epstein pool, whether it's in England with the royal family, or whether it's in France with Epstein's relationship with some of the politicians and government leaders there. And yes, he had real connections over there in terms of what they knew, in terms of if they knew young girls were being, brought into his house there for abuse and so forth. Nobody wants to look under those rocks. Nobody wants to look under those, under those rocks. For the most part, they have been, these other countries, I see, have been really trying to avoid this thing completely than getting involved in this.
Yeah, and it's, when it's how come there hasn't been a broader international investigation into this? Well, man, you got to start thinking back to like 45, Operation Paperclip. And it's like, hey, they only hung like 10% of the Nazis. Where the rest? And it's, well, a third of them went to the Soviet Union. Where are the other 2/3? I don't know how to tell you this, but, they're here. They're working for us now. And it's, and it's not until it's declassified in the 90s, but then you look back and you see the, right pictures of Wernher von Braun in aviators next to JFK and LeMay. And it's like, if you had told, oh, granted, everyone knew who Werner von Braun was, but I mean, if people had known the number of Nazis that we had brought back, I mean, again, it would have fractured the mind. And so, if the question comes, well, how come we haven't hung the rest of the Nazis? Where are they? Well, at a certain point, you got to go, oh, let's put two and two together. We have them, or we're protecting them because they have, right? We viewed the greater threat as the Soviet Union. If they get a missile to which they can tip with an atomic bomb and later a hydrogen bomb, it is now a greater interest to us to protect these Nazis, despite the fact that they are, goddamn Nazis, because the greater good will be, can we accelerate our own missile program and thus curb the rise of the Soviet Union? And then they start weighing, kind of what I said earlier, the rarefied air. Well, you start weighing things where it's, at first you kind of want to have this Captain America incorruptible. You go, no, we got to kill them. They're Nazis. And it's like, look, man, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are going to be child's play compared to what's on the horizon. We have to get missiles that we can tip with H bombs to deter the Soviets. And then you get to that point and you go, maybe the lesser of the evils is to bring the Nazis back here, right? It's a deal made with the devil. But if this is happening, you got to start to, well, if there's not an international investigation, I mean, how long do you have to think about it before you start going, oh, is this just paperclip part 2? Is this who's being protected? Are they making those same rationalizations, things that we won't know about for 50 years about, hey, we had to whatever with China, space weapons, and I don't know. I mean, could it be so high up that's why it's not happening? We don't know. I mean, it's all wild speculation, but as you said, it boggles the mind because despite his mathematical genius and his ability to set up systems, he couldn't do it alone. There was more to it. So,
oh, yes.
Yeah, absolutely mind-boggling.
Many people are out there who had connections to the sex trafficking operation who have not been brought to justice.
Insane. And now we'll go back to question 4, which is the same as question 7. And I worded it as, I was born in New Hampshire. I went to college in Georgia. If I met another New Hampshire native in physics class, that's a coincidence. Epstein dying in his cell, a botched paramedic response, no officer rounds, an impending court date, seemingly nonchalant notes. He didn't have any suicidal note. Instead, he was talking about how much he didn't like the food. And only a year after Whitey Bulger was murdered into prison is not a coincidence. So, which rounds into question 7 is, did Jeffrey Epstein kill himself?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously, I mean, the polls out there, 52% people believe that Epstein had been murdered. We spent a lot of months. I specifically brought in Philip Messing, had been a longtime police reporter for the New York Post. No investigative police reporter better in New York City than Phil. And he specifically came in to work on the final days of Epstein in terms of what happened behind bars, for my book. Listen, let me tell you the facts, because these are facts that can't be disputed. Okay. Regardless of all the conspiracy theories out there. Something that is absolutely important to note, and this is black and white, is that the locked doors to Jeffrey Epstein's cell in the SHU, that's the section of the jail
housing unit,
could only be opened remotely by an officer in the jail's control center. Okay, it had nothing to do with the guards who were on the floor. To open those locked doors, this had to be done through the master control center in the jail. Okay, this is an indisputable fact. To have individuals in the jail center opening those doors would amount to a huge conspiracy involving so many people. To me, I just don't believe that happened. To have someone get onto that floor to kill him. Okay, not only was that, there was also a second locked door, which had access to Epstein. That was assigned to a correctional officer's assigned to the high security housing unit who had a key. Okay, not the guards on the floor. We know the stories. We know what happened. The two guards, they were napping. They did a deal recently with the government when they came up on charges. There was incompetence almost at every level. I mean, it is true. It was the screw up of all screw ups. But I do believe that our investigation in the book shows that Epstein took his life, that he was not killed. And I want to give you a little background. There's questions that we don't know. The biggest question I have that I would like an answer to is, was DNA analysis conducted on the orange bed sheets that were found in his cell? At least one of which had been fashioned, of course, into the noose. Now, it's a matter of considerable forensic interest, because if DNA evidence had been found and it was determined not to belong to Jeffrey Epstein, but to an unidentified person, that certainly would undercut the findings of suicide. We went to the medical examiner. They said that's confidential information. They would not answer that. And they wouldn't even confirm whether DNA testing was done on that particular noose. We spoke to Jeffrey Epstein's brother, Mark, who does believe it was a homicide, assault rather than a suicide. And of course, you have Dr. Michael Bodden, a well-known forensic expert who sat in on the autopsy of Jeffrey Epstein, conducted his own investigation. And yes, he did find very interesting facts to consider about the ligature that Epstein had, and various medical results, from his death, that he says points to murder as opposed to suicide. But Bodden, what he can answer is he can't cite any medical evidence that suggests that the autopsy found that there was any defensive wounds on Epstein's fingers or arms that might have readily supported a conclusion of an assault. And that to me is highly significant, because Epstein, if in fact he was killed, he would have fought back in some way. And there's no evidence of that at all. Okay. Now, I make the claim in the book, this is through reporting that we did with investigative police reporter Philip Messick, in terms of interviews that were conducted. We truly believe that Epstein knew that that with Me Too and everything else going on, that he wasn't going to get a slap on the wrist, that he was going to end up in a federal pen. And this is a guy that knew that he couldn't live that way. This is a guy that had to have total control over his life. He had to have the temperature in his bedroom in his mansion set at a certain number of degrees. The towels in the massage rooms had to be folded just so. They had to be laundered in a certain way. This was a guy who had complete control of his life. And then you take all that control away, you put him behind bars where he can't even get the correct constipation medication that he's on. And this is a guy who was eating off the floor. He lost, in my belief, he completely lost it and knew that there was no way out, and did not want to, I think, go the route of a trial. And I think in a weak moment, he made a decision that he was going to take his life. Now, we interviewed two former inmates, one named William Mercy, the other named Miles Tisdale. They were both suicide companions. These were inmates who were specifically placed with other inmates who had been under suicide watch. And Epstein spent, in addition to speaking to his lawyers every day, he spent a great time talking to these two guys and had a lot of conversations with them. And what emerged in these conversations was that Epstein was severely afraid of being bullied behind bars. Being behind bars with the gangbangers and everybody else led Epstein back to his youth in Coney Island, where he was bullied as a youth. We don't know to what degree he was bullied in Coney Island when he was a little kid there, and a nerdy kid growing up in a very rough area outside of the Seagate community and where he was raised. But we do know that he was bullied as a child, and we don't know the extent of it. We don't know if he was sexually tortured in a way, or if he was raped, or what exactly happened to him. But we do know that something happened to Epstein when he was a kid. And when he was behind bars, that bullying became intense. And he was trying to hire people to protect him behind bars and so forth. And after a trial, and he'd be put into a federal pen, he knew what they do with pedophiles, with kids with guys who attack kids. Epstein, I think, couldn't face that. To some degree, I think he's a lot weaker than Ghislaine Maxwell. I think she's actually comes from tougher stock than Jeffrey Epstein. I think he kind of collapsed behind bars. And when he had all of his control taken away, I do believe that it was a mental thing, that he decided that the only control he would have in his life would be to take his life rather than rolling the dice on a trial. And you know, when you look at that, evidence, we also found for the book that there had been one publicized suicide attempt, but in fact, Epstein had been placed under suicide watch a second time that had not been reported. That this was a guy who, despite his lawyers saying that he was holding up, I don't think he was holding up. And these two inmates who know the psyche of other inmates both said that he was troubled, asking a lot of questions about what life was going to be like long-term behind bars. And I think that Epstein was a coward, and that he took the easy way out. And then I think you have to take into account very specific facts: the locked doors, the questions over the fact that there was no defensive wounds on Epstein. It makes for a great story. It makes for great conspiracy theories that people wanted him dead. And listen, there's rich and powerful people out there today that probably sleep a little bit better knowing that he's dead, and can't give up names based on their relationships with him and what they may have done or may not have done, or secrets that he told that they told him, or secrets that Jeffrey Epstein knew about them. But I think when you take a very journalistic approach to this, it is and again, we still don't know. I still have a big question over the DNA evidence on the noose. We don't know that to this day. Maybe we will learn that one day. And my mind might be changed based on new DNA evidence that could be released down the road about his death. But I think if you look at the facts as they are right now, I think you have to go in the direction of suicide opposed to murder, because there's no. I mean, Bodden is a very smart guy, and he does point out, I think, some very legitimate questions about the wound that Epstein suffered. But at the same time, I don't think his evidence is over the top that absolutely shows that this was a murder. And if so, who did the murder? Who was able to get behind these locked doors? because there is video evidence of what happened. While there was not a video camera trained on Epstein's cell, there is video footage that, of the general vicinity, and there's no video of some mystery person sneaking in, getting access to his cell in the middle of the night. It just doesn't exist. Epstein, I believe, was alone from the time he was last seen at 10:30 at night until daylight the next day when he was found. What was it? Were there mistakes made in the investigation? Absolutely. I mean, he should have never been. There's a phrase through the Bureau of Prisons. It's called cut and carry. That is a inmate who is found hanging in his cell. They cut and carry him out, seeking medical attention. In Epstein's case, it's almost without question he'd been dead already in his cell, and he should have been left for a proper police investigation to have been done. They should have never. The guard should have never touched his body. They should have never cut him down. He should have been pronounced dead in his cell, and because there was evidence contamination, they contaminated the crime scene. There were a lot of mistakes made from top to bottom in terms of how how the Justice Department and the Bureau of Prisons watched him or didn't watch him. And you have a institutional history of that correctional facility, which has since been shut down because it is the incompetence that has taken place there, not only by the guards who were moonlighting that night and sleeping through the hours when they should have been making rounds and forging their records. It is unfortunate that Epstein's death to some degree wasn't cleaner in the sense, because with what happened with the guards, with the questions over whether what individuals wanted him dead, it does make for some great conspiracy theories. But no one has shown me any proof that goes further in the direction that he was killed as opposed to that he took his life.
I mean, I think the single biggest piece of evidence would be no defensive marks. No one, doesn't matter if you're not a fighter. I've never learned how to fight in my life. I was never in the military. I don't know any tactics or lethal skills, but I mean, ingrained in the reptilian part of your brain, right? It's like fight, flight, there's breathing, there's sleeping, there's eating. You're going to throw some, even if it's just this, just cowering, even if it's just something, or if you're getting choked, you're at least going to be, no matter how in vain it is, you're going to do something. No defensive marks. And then the other, remotely unlocking the door, you have to go with Occam's razor. Because if it was that, then then what? How many guys from the inside were involved? Did they all die? And who killed Epstein? I mean, then is there not another suspicious death at the jail? Shouldn't that guy be dead too? And if they did want him dead, first of all, if he was an asset, he never would have gone to jail. He never would have been arrested. And if it did seem that for whatever reason it was inevitable and he was going to be arrested, he would have whacked him. You would have shot his plane out of the sky. You would have poisoned him. You would have hired a hitman. If you had to do it, you're not going to do it when he's in jail, right? I mean,
you would have done it in Paris. You would have had a great opportunity to do it away from American soil. You take him out there. I mean, a lot goes on overseas that the French authorities probably would have looked the other way. I mean,
you get him with a little girl on his plane and you use that as an excuse, and you go in and you shoot him in the head and you say, we saw, there's a guy, an older man grabbing a young girl, right? I mean, just like he was a perfect candidate to be an intelligence asset, he was also a perfect candidate for, you could have at any point just thrown an FBI raid in there and aimed high, right? Oh, he had a little girl. Who's going to disagree with that? You have, in the court of public opinion, everyone's going to be like, well, I mean, it wasn't a fair trial, but he did have little girls in his mansion. It doesn't pass the sniff test. Yeah, it's sexy. You want him to be killed by a CIA agent, right? And they're turning the cameras the other way. But yeah, what's the evidence? I think you're right. He loved his place at 54 degrees. He was a vegetarian. Everything perfect, just his way. And he's in a jail cell, and he can't control the temperature or the lights or the pillows and he doesn't have his daily massages. Like, yeah, he's probably killing himself.
Yeah. This was a guy who moved among his homes, who would fly on his jet like people would take the subway here in New York. He would hop on his jet. He'd go here, he'd go shopping there, he'd go to this country, he'd go to that country, picking up girls, here and there, and spending time on his island or in Florida or in New York or New Mexico. I mean, when you have that lifestyle and you are living in these palatial estates and you have servants and butlers and everybody is doing everything you want, and you find yourself in this tiny cell, my belief is that really, really killed him. I mean, again, you have to weigh, when he had the slap on the wrist conviction in Florida, he was given house release. He was given a monitor. He was having investigator found out he was still having sexual relations with underage victims while he had a monitor strapped on his ankle, because the Florida authorities completely looked the other way. He was allowed to go off, for work and return to this, facility, which wasn't even like a jail. It was more like a dormitory, to sleep in at night. That was nothing like what he faced in the, Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. This was a rough and tumble place. With the first night he was put in the general population, as we report in the book, he was mixed in with gangbangers. He was put behind bars with his absolute worst nightmares, because, as I said, he had a full return to his childhood back in Brooklyn when he was bullied, and we do know from friends he was bullied as a youth, and everything was stripped away. All these, all the money, all of these trust funds and millions of dollars in bank accounts and everything didn't matter anything behind bars.
Yeah. And even, and you could even take it from another angle, right? Here's a guy that was so obsessed with Harvard, with I'm going to be rich when I'm older, or, I'm going to succeed, or, brushing shoulders with these guys. And it wasn't even just about the money. It was also, I'm seen with these Bill Clinton knows me a favor. You take a guy like that, forget the whole control of his life, forget the whole can't have sex with young women, underage women, girls. There's also just there's that third part. I mean, to this guy's ego, to where he's hanging out with presidents and heads of countries and billionaires, and then he gets tried and convicted being a pedophile. I mean, that ego death might have been worse than actual death. I can't survive, I can't live through being tried with that. I'd know that they're going to find out who I am, and I would much rather, I'd much rather die as, the jet setting, whatever, than as opposed to someone who had it all. Like, that's worse than losing his ass. Because, right, he offered to put up basically every penny he owned to get out, right? I mean, that shows that it wasn't even the money. I mean, it was, but it was more. It was, he can't be seen as that, right? He can't be seen as a criminal. He can't be seen as anything but this upper echelon member of society.
Well, he always was justifying, even to these two gentlemen, even to these two former inmates who we interviewed. He told one of them, he said, I don't know why they're making this a big deal. He said, these weren't children. These girls were 15 and 16 years old. He was trying to say, I wasn't like I was raping,
Yeah, like 5-year-olds.
5-year-old kid. He was justifying that what he was doing was acceptable. He put off his conviction in Florida years before. When he came back to New York, and he was among the billionaire jet set in his New York mansion, he made a famous quote, brushing it off. Well, I was convicted down in Florida of this prostitution thing. To me, it's no worse than stealing a bagel. That's what he said.
Yeah. Victimless crime, I think he said.
So Epstein, I think he realized, he was smart enough to know that society was completely different, particularly in light of Me Too and everything else that was going on at the time, that he was going to do hard time. That this time the feds were going to put him away. Justice Department was going to put him away. And I don't know. I would love to see evidence on the other side that shows that, in fact, to kill him, you need an individual, and you need to get that individual in. And it would have to be a huge conspiracy, because many of the officials of that jail would have had to have been involved to get someone in, to get that access in, to do this. So. Yeah,
it's and my mom watches all these podcasts, so she'll hate this line, but I mean, it's like what he said. What did he also say in jail, right? How do you do this? How do you make this much money? You have to have one singular goal. You got to choose it and go after that. That's how you have plans, right? Like, I want this podcast to be the biggest podcast, so I'm focused on that. Everything else I do falls in with that. What Epstein say? It's about the pussy. He can't have that in jail, regardless of the money, regardless of the ego, regardless of if he's connected to the Mossad or the CIA or the KGB. He's not getting laid. I mean, that might any one of these things might have been enough for him to kill himself. The ego, getting laid, not being able to control every little aspect of his life. I mean, this guy was detached from reality. Like you said, he wanted to set up that like birthing center where he was going to impregnate as many women as possible to put his seed into future generations. I mean, this guy wasn't tethered in like the same level of the atmospheres. This guy was floating off, not just in the sense that, the rarefied air of the billionaires, but I mean, who else has that just kind of thought and actually starts planning that out? That's something that someone would say when you're drunk with some friends at 4 a.m. and you're all just trying to say the most messed up thing. I would be like Genghis Khan. I would have the most kids ever. This guy was actually like, I could take this piece of land I own, and if I had all these doctors, I could have these women, and I could just spend my time, pushing my seed onto future generations. I mean, that alone is, think of the ego involved in that. To think that the world needs more of you, way more of you. It all points to spending the rest of your life in jail. I'm out. I'm not doing this. I'm done. It's, who knows, man? Who knows? Maybe it's maybe the deepest conspiracy is that he paid someone to choke him because that's the only way he could get off, and then accidentally killed him. Who knows? It's I don't think that's what it is. I think you're probably right. He killed himself, but yeah, man, it's now if Ghislaine ends up dead, will this change your position?
Well, things are screwed up there at Brooklyn facility, but the Justice Department and the Southern District, they don't want blood on their hands a second time. She's going to be brought to trial kicking and screaming. The only freedom she has, the only decision she has that is completely her own, is whether or not she's going to give up names and do some type of a deal to lessen her possible jail term behind bars. That's the only thing in her control right now. And that's a decision that, here we are taping this, in September. She's got about 2 months time to make a decision whether or not she wants to roll the dice before a jury.
It'll be fascinating nonetheless. I would love to have you on for your other book, All the President's Women. I would love to talk to you sometime about that. And can you give anybody any hints on what you're working on right now, or do you got to play that close to the chest?
There's looking into some new books right now, and going to go down some new roads and true crime and some other avenues. But this is a story. The Epstein story continues to be so intriguing, particularly as we get close to the Maxwell trial, that I'm going to stay with it, and we'll see if there's enough for a follow-up down the road. I think we have to get through the Maxwell trial and see if in fact she reveals some names, and I think we really need to find out more about whether there's DNA evidence on those bed sheets that were ripped up. I can tell you this, another fact that's in the book is that another inmate in that section did hear Epstein cutting up bed sheets the night before.
Yeah.
So plays into the thought that when that other inmate that he had as a bunkmate was removed, and Epstein knew that another cellmate was probably coming into his cell within the next day or two, that he had this window of time where he was going to be alone in that jail cell to make a decision whether he was going to do this or not. And I think that, that window he knew would be closing. And, the fact is, if there's somebody else in that cell and they see a guy in the middle of the night who's getting ready to try to hang himself, that guy's going to start screaming.
Yeah.
For guards.
Yeah.
And kicking doors and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. I would argue Mr. Levine, his internet connection is cut out. I don't know if he can. This is the CIA. They don't want us talking about this. Mr. Barry Levine's connection. Mr. Levine, I don't know if you can see and or hear me, but I cannot see or hear you. We'll stay with this for a minute, see if it works. But I think he makes a pretty compelling argument that Epstein probably did kill himself. I mean, that's just what it seems like. Let me, I'll email him right now. Your connection broke up. Yep, I think we lost him. I hope that's not me. I hope that's not my internet. Is it? Now is the hardest part of podcasting. Let's see. So his phone died. Oh, I didn't realize he was using his phone. So his book, everybody, available on Audible. It's fantastic listen. And I will let him see. So Mr. Levine, I'm recording this right now on my phone as well. This is the end of the podcast. The book is available on Audible. It's an absolutely fantastic listen. It's horrifying. It will make your blood run cold. This guy was a real monster. Could he been used as intelligence? Possibly. It almost doesn't matter whether he does, but it almost doesn't matter whether or not he killed himself. Like, his whole life itself was insane. That's the very ending. It doesn't take away from how insane his life was. It's a fantastic book. Mr. Levine, thank you. I'll send you the link when this is up. And yeah, everybody check out the book. It's fantastic.